They told her justice was a luxury until she weaponized it. Tonight's story follows Simone Davis, a community lawyer one eviction away from losing everything, and Elias Thorne, a billionaire who treats feelings like bad investments. A desperate marriage contract ties them together, his inheritance on the line, her clients' lives on the brink. When a child's nebulizer hums through the night and black mold crawls behind a crib, Emoman aims for court. Elias aims for the boardroom. What begins as a cold transaction turns into a high-stakes war, leaked memos, collapsing stocks, and asasosamos. Shareholder revolt that shakes a real estate empire. But the cruelest twist. The money funding Simone's fight came from Elias's past deal. Stay with me as we ask, can power be repurposed? And can two enemies rewrite the terms of fate? This is Destiny Contract. The judge's gavel strike still echoed in Simone's ears as she pushed open the frosted glass door with its peeling letters, Southside Community Law Office. Dismissed. A single word spoken with the unfeeling cruelty of an overloaded courtroom was enough to choke her last bit of hope in the case. The office greeted her with the familiar smell of old paper coffee brewed too early that morning and a lingering trace of desperation. The fluorescent lights overhead hummed tiredly, illuminating the peeling beige walls and the towering stacks of files that threatened to swallow the two desks. This was her fortress, and it was crumbling. She dropped her worn-out leather briefcase to the floor. It landed with a heavy thud, as heavy as the feeling in her chest. A soft sniffle pulled her from her thoughts. Mrs. Hernandez looked up from the hard plastic guest chair. Her eyes were red and swollen, her hands twisting a soaked tissue. She had been waiting for her. Simone's heart clenched. The anger from her failure in court instantly dissolved, replaced by a familiar ache. She put on the face she always had to wear, calm, controlled, and resilient. "Maria," she said softly, sitting in the chair opposite, ignoring the pile of unopened mail on her desk. "The hearing didn't go as we'd hoped." "They don't care," Mrs. Hernandez whispered in a mix of English and Spanish. "They don't care about Miguel. They just see us as cockroaches." "No, don't say that," Simone countered, but her voice lacked its usual weight. Mrs. Hernandez's case was typical. She and 10 other families in a Pilsen apartment building were suing their landlord, a faceless real estate corporation, for willfully ignoring the toxic black mold infesting their units. Her 8-year-old son, Miguel, had been hospitalized 3 times in the last 6 months for severe asthma. "His nebulizer," she sobbed, fresh tears welling up. "It runs all night. The mold. Miss Simone, it is everywhere." Did the judge see the pictures? Did he smell it? Simone had presented the photos. She had presented the medical reports. But the other side, an army of expensive lawyers from a big firm in the loop, had buried her in motions and procedures. They argued the case was groundless and frivolous. And today the judge had agreed dismissing it on a small technicality regarding the statute of limitations that Simone, with her limited resources, had failed to anticipate. "This isn't the end, Maria," Simone said, trying to project a certainty she didn't feel. "This was just a preliminary hearing. We'll appeal. We'll refile." Mrs. Hernandez just nodded, defeat etched onto her face. She knew just as Simone knew that appealing took time and money. They had neither. After reassuring Mrs. Hernandez with empty promises and scheduling another meeting, Simone walked her to the door. She watched the small woman, her shoulders slumped, walk unsteadily toward the bus stop. They weren't just cockroaches. They were people fighting to breathe, literally. And she had failed them. She returned to her desk. The silence in the office was now suffocating. She hated bullies. She hated corporations that treated people like Maria Hernandez as operating costs. She could have worked in the loop. She could have been making 6 figures wearing power suits and arguing over billion-dollar contract clauses. But she had chosen this place. Or maybe this place had chosen her. Her eyes scanned the mail on her desk, mostly junk bills and threatening notices from opposing law firms. But there was one thick cream-colored envelope at the bottom. Certified mail. A chill ran down her spine. Certified mail never brought good news. Her fingers trembled as she tore open the seal. It was from the building's management company. She skimmed the dry legal language, breach of financial obligations, repeated delinquency in payments. And then the final line. You are hereby notified that you have 30 days to pay the full amount owed, or the office will be sealed and you will be evicted from the premises. 30 days. The envelope slipped from her grasp. She sank into her chair, the air feeling as if it were sucked from her lungs. This wasn't just about her. This was about Mrs. Hernandez. About the family facing wrongful foreclosure, about the immigrants seeking asylum. This office was their last line of defense. If it disappeared, so did their hope. The exhaustion turned into something hot and bitter, helpless rage. Her gaze drifted to the opposite wall where her framed law degree hung. University of Chicago, cum laude. That degree had once been a symbol of hope. It promised justice. It promised a level playing field where truth and righteousness would win. It had lied. The truth was justice had a price tag, an expensive one she couldn't afford. The system wasn't broken. It was built this way. It was built to crush people like Marie and small law offices like hers. Simone dropped her head to her desk, the smell of old paper and ink filling her nose. Her ideals were solid, but the walls were caving in. She had only 30 days before brutal reality won. 10 miles north in a completely different world, there were no humming fluorescent lights. There was only silence. It was a designed silence, filtered and controlled, as sterile as the air in the penthouse that occupied the entire 90th floor of the St. Regis Tower. Here everything was glass, chrome steel, and Calicut marble. Even the art on the wall, an original Rothko, was chosen for its intentional absence of emotion. Elias Thorne stood before the floor-to-ceiling glass wall looking down on Chicago. He didn't see a city. He saw a spreadsheet. He saw assets, rezoning districts, logistical flows. He raised the razor-thin phone to his ear, his voice flat, devoid of inflection. "No, David, I don't care about its community impact," he said. "I care about the ROI. And that public housing project you're praising is a financial drag." He listened for a moment, his fingers tapping an impatient rhythm on the cold glass. "Emotion," Elias said, and the word sounded foreign in his mouth. "Is a fancy word for a bad investment. Compassion isn't a line item on my balance sheet. The project is losing money. Liquidate our position. Yes, all of it. Now. He ended the call before David could object. Done. Finished. Like crossing an item off a to-do list. No satisfaction, just the completion of a task. Elias hated inefficiency, and to him, emotion was the worst form of it. The silence of the penthouse returned, wrapping him like armor. "Sir," an invisible voice chimed from the intercom. "Mr. Abernathy from the family law office is in the lobby." Elias frowned. An unscheduled interruption. "Send him up." Harold Abernathy was a living relic. He had been his grandfather's lawyer, a man in a rumpled tweed suit who carried an ancient briefcase and was the only person in Elias's orbit who seemed entirely unafraid of him. "Elias," Abernathy said as he entered his nod, serving as a greeting. He refused the insincere offer of water. "Harold, this is unexpected. Is there an issue with the estate tax?" Elias asked, getting straight to the point. "I'm afraid the news is more personal," Abernathy said, his voice unusually gentle. "Your grandfather Arthur passed away this morning, peacefully, in his sleep." Elias stood still for a moment. He processed the information. Arthur. Gone. He didn't feel grief. He felt annoyed. Arthur was the only person Elias had ever respected, not out of love, but because he was the only one he could never predict or control. He was a grandmaster chess opponent, and now the game was over. "I see," Elias said. "Send me the summary of procedures." Abernathy sighed. "Elias, I can't. There are complications. Arthur was always an eccentric. His will is no exception." Elias crossed his arms. "What complications?" Abernathy opened his battered briefcase and removed a formally bound document. "The majority of the estate control of the Thorn Industries Board, everything, is placed in a trust." "Go on." "It shall." Abernathy cleared his throat, putting on his glasses. "Remain in trust until my grandson Elias Thorn demonstrates a commitment to stability and human connection proven by his participation in a legal marriage." The air thickened. "Which marriage," to Abernathy read on, not daring to look up, "must be maintained for a period of no less than 12 calendar months." Elias said nothing. Abernathy lowered the paper. "If you fail to meet the terms within 18 months of his passing, all control will permanently default to the Thorn Philanthropic Fund." A dry, sharp laugh escaped Elias's throat. "This is a joke." "Arthur never joked about business," Abernathy said. "And this is business." Elias roared, his composure cracking for a second. He paced the room. "This is his last lesson. A sick, posthumous attempt to teach me from the grave." He stopped staring out the window. His kingdom, everything he had worked to control, about to be stripped away by a medieval clause, by the sentimentality of an old man. Elias despised marriage. He despised love. They were weak, messy, illogical transactions based on unquantifiable emotions. They were liabilities. But there was one thing he despised more than weakness: losing control. His anger cooled, hardening into an icy resolve. Arthur thought he could back him into a corner. He thought he could force him to feel. The old man had underestimated him. If Arthur wanted a game, Elias would play. But he would play by his own rules. Harold? Elias set his voice flat once more. Does the will specify anything about the nature of the marriage, other than it being legal and lasting a year? Abernathy blinked. No, just that it's a valid marriage certificate. Good. After the lawyer left, Elias stood in his empty room. 18 months, 1 year for the marriage. He would not be manipulated. He would not be taught. He would handle this like any other hostile takeover. He wouldn't find a wife. He would hire one. He didn't need love connection or stability. He needed a contract, a simple business transaction. 1 year of service in exchange for a life-changing sum. He needed someone smart, clear-headed, who wouldn't develop foolish feelings. Someone with nothing to lose. Someone, ideally, who was desperate. Elias activated the intercom. Jessica, get my research team. I have a new acquisition target. 3 days later, that storm arrived at Simone's office. It didn't come in the form of a sealed letter or an angry phone call. It came in the shape of a man wearing a charcoal gray Tom Ford suit so impeccably tailored. It seemed absurd in black calfskin, John Lobb shoes so polished, Simone could see the distorted reflection of her cluttered files on their toes. He walked in unannounced, as if he owned the building. His presence sucked the air from the small room. His scent, something expensive, subtle, perhaps sandalwood and ozone, instantly overpowered the smell of old paper and burnt coffee. Elias Thorne looked around her shabby office with a barely concealed disgust. His eyes swept over the peeling walls, her ancient computer, and the guest chair that was split open. His gaze was cold, analytical, and utterly impersonal. Miss Simone Davis. His voice was deep and even, like an expensive engine idling. Can I help you? Simone asked, her hand tightening around her pen. She was used to debt collectors, but this man was different. He didn't look like a collector. He looked like the man who owned the collection agency. Elias didn't sit. He preferred to stand a clear power move. He placed a slim leather-bound portfolio on her desk, pushing it through the junk mail. I have a business proposition for you, he said. I've researched you. University of Chicago cum laude, a perfect bar exam score, no personal debt but this office. He glanced around, is drowning in it. Simone stiffened. I don't know who you are, but if you're... I am Elias Thorne, he interrupted, as if the name explained everything. And I require 1 year of your life. Specifically, I require you to play the role of my fiancée for 12 months. Silence filled the room, broken only by the hum of the fluorescent light. Simone blinked. Once, twice. And then she laughed. It wasn't a happy sound. It was a dry, weary noise that escaped her chest. It was the laugh of someone who had reached the end of her rope and just heard the most ridiculous thing in the world. Your fiancé, she repeated. Are you insulting me or your own intelligence? I have no time for either, Elias said, completely unaffected by her scorn. My grandfather died. He left a ridiculous clause in his will. I need to be married for 1 year to gain full inheritance of my empire. You need money to save this place. He pointed to the portfolio. Inside is a contract. In exchange for 1 year of public performance, attending events, and living under the same roof, separate rooms, of course, I will pay off this office's entire debt. And he paused. I will fully fund it for the next 5 years. Simone's laugh died. 5 years? She thought of Mrs. Hernandez. She thought of the 30 days she had left. But this was a compromise she couldn't make. This was everything she hated: the rich using money to bend reality to buy people. Get out, she said, her voice ice cold. Ms. Davis, be realistic. Ideals don't pay rent. I said. Simone shot to her feet, the pen in her hand snapping in two. Get out! Elias stared at her, a flicker of annoyance in his eyes. Perhaps he had misjudged her. He shrugged, a dismissive gesture of someone who had just lost a minor investment. He picked up the portfolio. A pity, he said. Good luck with the eviction. He turned his expensive shoes, making no sound on the threadbare carpet. He was almost at the door. And then Simone's phone rang. It was the specific ringtone she set for her most urgent clients. Her mind was screaming to let him go, but her instincts won. She picked up the phone, her eyes still locked on Elias's back. Simone Davis. Miss Simone. Mrs. Hernandez's voice came through, breaking with sheer panic. They are here. The police. They say we have to go now. They are, oh God, they are moving my things to the sidewalk. Simone's world froze. Maria's hysterical sobs, the shouting in the background, the sound of metal clanging, all the abstract things, morality, pride, outrage, vanished. There was only a brutal, immediate reality. A family was being thrown onto the street right now. Mrs. Hernandez hadn't even waited for the appeal. The landlord had won. Elias paused at the door, his hand on the knob. He turned back, cold curiosity on his face. Simone looked at him. She saw the polished shoes, the perfect suit, the limitless wealth. And then she looked at the phone in her hand, a thin lifeline to a woman who was losing everything. Her pride, her self-respect. They were luxuries. Luxuries Mrs. Hernandez couldn't afford. The desperation in her eyes hardened. The trembling vanished, replaced by steel. Her voice, when she spoke, wasn't trembling. It was sharp, like a blade. Wait. Elias turned back fully. Simone ended the call with Mrs. Hernandez. Maria, listen to me. Don't resist. I'm calling their lawyer. I will fix this. I promise. She hung up. The room was perfectly silent. You said 5 years, Simone said. Elias raised one eyebrow. Not enough. She walked toward him, each step a surrender of a piece of her soul. I want 10 years. A fully funded, irrevocable trust. Enough to run this office, hire 3 more lawyers, and cover all litigation costs for 10 years. She stopped right in front of him. And you will have no control over it. The money goes into an escrow account managed by my lawyer. All of it. As soon as the contract is signed. Elias looked at her. The curiosity in his eyes shifted to something else. A flicker of grudging respect. He was used to people begging. He was not used to people negotiating from rock bottom. He held the portfolio out to her. 10 years, fine. As long as you understand your role. You are my fiancée. You smile when I tell you to. You attend the parties. And above all, you will not make trouble. Simone snatched the portfolio from his hand. I'll review the terms. My lawyer will be in touch, Elias said. You have 24 hours. That eviction, he glanced at her phone, isn't going to stop itself. He left. The room seemed to return to its normal size, but the suffocating feeling remained. Simone stood alone among her files. She looked down at the leather portfolio in her hands. It felt like a sentence. She had just chosen between her self-respect and the survival of dozens of families. She had chosen. She picked up the phone, her hand no longer shaking. She had sold herself to the devil, and now she would use his money to sue men like him out of existence. Connect me to the law offices of Apex Consolidated, she said into the phone, her voice ice cold. Tell them Simone Davis is calling, about the eviction in Pilsen. Yes, I'll hold. Moving into Elias Thorne's penthouse wasn't like moving house. It was like being transferred to a private space station. Simone's old apartment in South Shore was small and creaky, but it was alive. It had the sound of distant ambulance sirens, her neighbor's salsa music, and the smell of curry from downstairs. This place, this endless space of glass and steel overlooking the city, was completely silent. It was a heavy, technologically controlled silence so total she could hear the blood rushing in her own ears. Your rooms are in the West Wing, Elias had said on the first day, not to her but to his assistant. Mine are in the East Wing. The common areas are the living room and kitchen. Anna will manage your schedule and daily needs. Daily needs began with the erasure of her old self. On the second day, the stylists arrived. They didn't ask what she liked. They brought racks of Elias approved clothes, sharply structured suits in silk and cashmere, in a color palette of charcoal, navy, ivory, and black. Does he think I'm attending a funeral? Simone muttered as she watched her own practical work clothes being bundled into trash bags. Mr. Thorne prefers simplicity and efficiency, the head stylist, a severe-looking woman named Helene, said. These colors are not distracting. Simone stood before the floor-to-ceiling mirror, forced into a navy silk dress and Manolo Blahnik heels that she was sure had been designed by a torturer. Her hair had been cut and blown out into a sleek, serious style. She looked like an expensive doll. She looked like one of Apex's lawyers. I feel like I'm in a costume, she said, her voice sounding strange in the vast dressing room. Elias, looking at a tablet in the doorway, glanced up. That is exactly what it is, he said. And you need to learn your lines. The first performance is tonight, our engagement party. The party. Simone had imagined it would be a small, discreet gathering. She was wrong. The penthouse was now packed with people. They were as cold, polished, and expensive as the furniture itself. Their laughter was sharp and held no warmth, the clinking of their champagne glasses brittle. Elias stood beside her, his hand resting lightly on the small of her back. It was a gesture of possession, a warning. The diamond ring, a huge soulless rock he'd made her wear, felt heavy on her finger. Elias, darling, you're finally settling down. A platinum blonde woman glided over, air kissing the space near Elias's cheek. And this must be the lucky girl. Simone Davis, Elias introduced his voice flat. "This is Bryce and her husband, Don." They looked at her, but they didn't see her. They were appraising her. They scanned her dress chosen by Elias, her hair styled by Elias, and the ring bought by Elias. Simone felt like a strange fish dropped into a shark tank. She was an anthropologist studying a hostile tribe. She nodded, smiled the fake smile she was practicing, and tried to look like she belonged. She managed for almost an hour, clinging to her sparkling water like a life raft, until Marcus Vance cornered her near the glass wall. He was a hedge fund manager with a predator's smile. "So," he said, his voice dripping with self-satisfaction, "you're Simone. Have to admit you're not Elias's type. He's never, well, associated with someone so real." "I'm not sure what real means in this context," Simone replied, keeping her voice neutral. "Oh, a community lawyer, I hear," Vance smirked, taking a sip of his scotch. "How noble. Saving the city's leeches. Must be very satisfying." The familiar anger coiled in her stomach. Leeches. He was talking about Maria Hernandez, about sick children. The old Simone would have yelled at him. She would have exposed his moral ignorance. But the new Simone was wearing a $3,000 dress and a $300,000 ring. She was in enemy territory, wearing enemy armor. She took a deep breath. She would play his game. She smiled. It was the smile she reserved for opposing counsel right before she ripped their argument apart in court. "Leeches," she repeated, as if considering an interesting academic concept. "That's an interesting term, Mr. Vance. How do you define it? Someone who receives something they didn't earn." Vance was taken aback by her calm. "Well, yes, exactly. People who take advantage of the system." "I see." Simone nodded, her gaze razor sharp. "So, Mr. Vance, did your firm, Vance Capital, receive any state tax subsidies for its new headquarters in Fulton Market?" Vance's smile froze. "That was a standard business incentive. To promote growth. A $15 million incentive if the public filings are correct." Simone's voice was still light conversational, but every word had weight. "In exchange for a promise to create 50 jobs. If my math is right, that's the government taxpayer money subsidizing you to the tune of $300,000 per job. Meanwhile, my leech clients are just trying to get $200 a month in food stamps." Vance's face turned red. "Now listen here, little lady. I meant no offense," Simone said, still smiling sweetly. "I'm just trying to understand your definition. Thank you for clarifying. Now, if you'll excuse me, I think my fiancée is looking for me." She glided past him, leaving him standing there, his mouth hanging open like a fish. She went straight to the balcony, the cold Chicago night air hitting her face, feeling wonderful. The glass door slid open behind her. "What did you just do?" Elias's deep voice. She didn't turn around. "I was associating. Marcus Vance is a key partner in my fund. You just made him look like an idiot in front of half a dozen investors." She finally turned to face him. "He called my clients leeches. He is an idiot." She was tired of the game, tired of the dress, tired of him. You wanted me to play a part. I played it. But I will not stand there and be insulted. Elias stared at her for a long moment, his face unreadable in the city lights. She expected a reprimand, a threat of breach of contract. Instead, something flickered in his eyes. It wasn't anger. It was curiosity. The corner of his mouth quirked an almost imperceptible muscle movement. He is an idiot, Elias admitted. But he's a useful idiot with a lot of money. He stepped up, standing beside her, looking out at the skyline. Next time, he said, his voice low, wait until after the deal is signed to mentally destroy him. It's strategically more effective. He turned and went back inside, leaving Simone alone on the balcony, completely bewildered. She hadn't just survived his world. She had just used her weapons in his territory. And Elias, her ruthless fake fiancé, didn't seem to mind. He seemed intrigued. Elias Thorne's money was like a shot of adrenaline straight to the heart of Simone's dying practice. The crumbling community law office was gone. In its place was the Davis Justice Initiative, a new fully funded legal entity with a real office in the South Loop, still close enough to the community, but professional enough to make opposing firms nervous. Mrs. Hernandez had been moved to a safe, clean apartment at the new fund's expense, pending the lawsuit. Most importantly, Simone was no longer alone. She had hired a veteran private investigator and a sharp, hungry young lawyer fresh out of her old school. For the first time in her life, she wasn't just fighting. She was armed. And her number one target was Apex Consolidated. With her new capital, she had refiled the lawsuit, not with a weak plea, but with a barrage of aggressive motions. She demanded environmental reports, internal maintenance logs, and every email exchange related to the Pilsen building. As expected, Apex hit back. They buried her in thousands of pages of meaningless documents. They argued her requests were overly broad and unduly burdensome. It was the classic tactic, bleed the opponent dry. But this time Simone had endless resources. She matched every motion, challenged every delay. Which is why she found herself in the penthouse at 3:00 a.m., 2 weeks after the engagement party. She had turned Elias's $50,000 mahogany dining table into her war room. It was covered in documents, engineering reports on structural integrity, air toxin analysis from a private lab, and floor plans. At the center of the mess were the photos she couldn't put away, Miguel Hernandez on his nebulizer, his small face pinched in distress. The black mold spreading across Mrs. Hernandez's bedroom wall like a map of hell. Another child in the building, with a frightening rash on her arms. She was exhausted. She'd had too much coffee and too little sleep. She was trying to find the link, the smoking gun. The engineer's report said the problems were due to deferred maintenance, but Apex's lawyers argued it was normal wear and tear. She was trying to prove intentional negligence, and she was hitting a legal brick wall. Overcome with fatigue, she put her head down on her arms just for a second and fell asleep. Elias woke at 4:30 a.m. as he always did. It was when the European markets opened. He followed a rigid routine workout, cold shower, espresso market analysis. But this morning his routine was broken. As he entered the kitchen, he stopped. The dim pre-dawn light from the windows illuminated a scene of chaos. His dining table, a minimalist Italian work of art, had been violated. It was covered in paper binders and empty coffee mugs. And then he saw her. Simone was slumped asleep over a legal pad, her cheek pressed against the spiral binding. The sleek hair his stylists had worked on was a mess, strands of it stuck to her cheek. In this light, without the power suit, without the sharp edge, she looked young and dangerously exhausted. A feeling of irritation rose in him. This was messy. It was illogical and inefficient. He was about to wake her to reprimand her for turning his common space into a college dorm. But as he stepped forward, his eyes fell on the items on the table. He picked up a photograph. A baby with a breathing tube taped to its tiny face. He felt nothing. That was his first defense. It was a data point, an inconvenience. But he kept looking. He looked at the child's eyes. He looked at the mold behind the crib. He glanced at her case summary. Duty of care, negligent damages, emotional distress. He put the photo down almost in disgust, not at the photo, but at the strategy. When Simone jerked awake hours later to the click of an espresso cup being set on the table, her neck ached. Elias was standing there fully dressed in a perfect suit, looking like he'd already conquered the world before breakfast. "I see your new office," he said, his voice flat. Simone scrambled to sit up, embarrassed by her mess. I was working. I fell asleep." "You're wasting my money," he said bluntly. The word stung. "I am not. I'm building a case. I have proof of the mold. I have the medical records. You have a sad story." Elias cut her off, impatience in his voice. He pushed one of the photos of Miguel toward her with his fingertip as if it were dirty. And courts don't care about sad stories. They care about money. "What are you talking about? Your strategy is all emotion. Duty of care, emotional distress. These are weak terms. You're trying to sue them for being immoral." He took a sip of his espresso. "That's why you're going to lose." His arrogance made her blood boil. "And what do you suggest, oh legal expert? All you know is hostile takeovers." "Exactly," Elias said. "And this is a hostile takeover. Apex is an LLC, formed just to own that building, correct, a shell company. You're trying to prove they knew about the mold. Don't." He ran a hand over her papers, pulling out a financial statement she had overlooked. "Prove they're crooks." Simone blinked. "Crooks. You're trying to prove they were negligent in their spending. Wrong. Prove they were intentionally not spending. Why to keep the building at a paper loss? They're claiming tax depreciation on an asset they are willfully letting rot." He pointed to a line item. "They're diverting rent to a parent company in Delaware, shielding their liability and defrauding their own investors about the asset's true value. Apex isn't just making kids sick. They're committing financial fraud." He looked her dead in the eye, and for the first time she saw the sharp-edged ruthlessness that had built his empire. "Don't sue them for being bad landlords. Sue them for fraud. Go straight for their wallets. Demand the court open the parent company's books. That's where they're hiding the money. That's where you'll find your win." Simone sat stunned. Silence filled the room. His advice, It was cold, impersonal, and completely devoid of the case's morality. And it was utterly brilliant. It was a sharp blade that cut through her months of frustration. He had just handed her the ultimate weapon, not from compassion, but from a place of cold, predatory logic. Elias set his empty espresso cup down. "Now," he said, straightening his cuffs, "clean up my dining table. You're making a mess." He walked away, leaving Simone sitting in her chaos, staring at the financial report with an entirely new perspective. She hated to admit it, but the selfish millionaire she was tied to had just saved her case. Elias's strategy was a scalpel. With it, Simone cut a precise line into the underbelly of the apex beast, past the blubber of shell corporations and legal lies. She wasn't fighting alone in a rundown office anymore. At the Davis Justice Initiative, she had a team. She had Sal, a grizzled PI, with a face like a crumpled paper bag and eyes that saw everything. "You were right, boss," Sal said over the phone, his voice gravelly. "Took your rich boy's advice, the financial fraud angle. Apex's sister, that Delaware parent company you're after, Pinnacle Holdings. It's a maze." "But you found the exit," Simone said, standing in her new office, looking down at the Chicago streets. "Always an exit," Sal grunted. "Took some doing, but I cracked the original incorporation filings, the seed money. The guy who fronted the cash for Pinnacle to buy that building 7 years ago." "Who was it?" Simone asked, her heart speeding up. This was it. Not a name, a fund. Thorn Ventures Equity Fund. The silence stretched. Simone gripped the phone. The air in her bright, efficient office suddenly felt cold. "Sal," she said slowly, "are you sure?" "Sure as taxes," Sal replied. "A $5 million investment dated August 10th, 2018. Note says acquisition of high-potential multifamily real estate. Thorn Ventures. Is that?" "Yes." Simone cut him off, her voice terrifyingly flat. "That's him." She hung up. She stood motionless for several minutes. The glass wall of her office reflected her own image, the sharp suit, the sleek hair. A woman of power. A woman funded by the very money that had poisoned Miguel Hernandez. The irony was brutal. It tasted like bile. She thought she was using his money to fight his world. But she was just using his money to clean up his own filth. She went to the penthouse that evening. She didn't work. She didn't eat. She sat in the dark living room in her gilded cage and waited. In her hand was a copy of the investment document Sal had sent. Elias came in close to 10 p.m., loosening his silk tie. He looked tired but as controlled as ever. He switched on a light and visibly startled when he saw her sitting there, a silent statue in the shadows. "You scared me," he said, a flash of annoyance in his voice. "Meditating in the dark." Simone didn't get up. She just raised her head. The light from the lamp caught her face, and Elias saw for the first time the cold, pure rage in her eyes. "You know," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "I wondered why you helped me, why you gave me the financial strategy. I thought maybe you were starting to care." Elias crossed his arms, wary. "I don't care. I hate sloppy work. Your strategy was sloppy." "No," Simone said. "It wasn't sloppy. It was just incomplete." She stood up and walked toward him. She placed the paper on the marble table between them. "Thorn Ventures," she said. "August 10th, 2018, $5 million. Elias glanced at the paper. His expression didn't change, but a small muscle in his jaw twitched. He recognized it. "That was 7 years ago," he said, his voice even. "A minor real estate play. It's been profitable." "Profitable?" Simone repeated the word, hissing through her teeth. "Miguel Hernandez is 8 years old. He's had asthma for 7 years. Your minor real estate play was the money they used to buy that building. They never fixed the ventilation. They never treated the mold. Because doing so would cut into your profit." The truth in all its ugliness hit her like a physical blow. "Oh, God," she whispered, taking a step back as if she'd touched something toxic. The money you're paying me. This contract, my new office, it's all blood money." "Don't be dramatic," Elias snapped, finally reacting defensive. It was a passive investment in a large portfolio. "Dramatic?" Her shout echoed in the sterile room, the sound of it shocking alive. "I took your money. I signed my name to this thinking I was making a necessary sacrifice. But I'm not a sacrifice. I'm an accomplice." She threw the paper at him. "I'm using your money to sue you. This whole thing, this fated contract. It's a sick joke, your money. The money you're paying me to save my office was built on the sick lungs of the children I'm trying to protect." "It's business," Elias roared, his controls shattering, revealing the ruthless arrogance beneath. "I invest in profit, not morality. I sign dozens of deals a quarter. Do you expect me to personally inspect the plumbing of every asset in my portfolio?" That broke her anger. It doused the fire, leaving only a cold, shattered ice. The sheer absolute detachment of him. He didn't even see. "No," Simone said, her voice breaking now, but not with sadness, with finality. "I don't expect anything from you. Not anymore." She turned and walked toward the west wing, toward her room. "This contract was a mistake," she said over her shoulder. "I'm done. I'm leaving." A pure, cold panic flickered in Elias's eyes. Not for her. For the will. For the control. "You can't," he said, striding after her. "We have a legally binding contract." "Then sue me," she yelled back, whipping around to face him. She was trembling with rage and betrayal. "Take me to court. I would rather spend the rest of my life fighting you than spend one more second breathing the same air as you." She turned away, heading straight for the private elevator, not even bothering with a coat or a bag. She would not stay here another minute. "Simone, stop!" He grabbed her arm. She ripped her arm away like he was acid. "Don't touch me!" She jabbed the elevator button, furious tears spilling over. "Don't you get it? You turned me into the very thing I hate. You won. Congratulations." The elevator doors began to open. Elias stood there watching her, watching the absolute contempt on her face. He saw the will, the billions, and his empire dissolving. But just beneath that panic, for the first time in his life, he felt something else. A hot, foreign, twisting sensation in his gut. He wasn't seeing a business partner breaking a contract. He was seeing a genuinely good person, someone he perhaps admired looking at him like he was a monster. And he realized to his horror that she was right. It was shame. "Wait," he said. His voice was no longer a command. It was almost a plea. Simone froze her finger hovering over the lobby button. Elias looked at the paper lying on the floor. He looked at the photos of the sick children she'd left on the dining table weeks ago. "The plumbing," he muttered, his voice lost. "The children?" "You were right," Simone said bitterly. "You don't see. You never see. I don't." He admitted the raw vulnerability in his voice, surprising them both. He looked at her, utterly lost. "I don't know how." He took a breath, swallowing a lifetime of pride. "Then, show me." Simone stood stunned. The elevator door chimed open, inviting her to escape. But she didn't get in. She turned back, her face wet with angry tears, and stared at the man who had ruined and saved her in the same breath. He wasn't ordering. He was asking. The elevator door remained open, a bright stainless steel rectangle inviting her to escape. Simone looked at Elias. His words hung in the sterile air between them. "Show me." Her skepticism was hard as diamonds. "Show you what?" She snapped, the angry tears drying on her cheeks. "Another data point for you to analyze, a human cost to factor into your profit and loss spreadsheet." "I don't know," Elias said, and the raw helplessness in his voice was real. He, the man who always had an answer, was fumbling. "Show me why. Show me why what I did wasn't just a bad investment, but wrong." The word wrong. He said it like a foreign word he had just learned. That was the word that stopped her. A lie would have been easier. A legal threat would have been more predictable. But that simple, confused admission, it broke through her defenses. She looked at him, this man who was the architect of both her salvation and her ruin. She saw his panic about the will. But underneath it, she also saw a crack. A tiny, faint crack in his perfect facade. She took a deep breath, making a decision that would change everything. "Fine," she said, her voice sharp as broken glass. "But on my terms. Not your world. Mine." She stepped away from the elevator, letting the door slide shut behind her. "Tomorrow, 9 a.m., she ordered. "Meet me in the lobby. No car, no bodyguard. And for God's sake, Elias, dress like a human being." The next morning, a human being for Elias Thorne was a pair of perfectly tailored dark jeans that probably cost 3 months of her old rent and a simple black cashmere turtleneck. He looked lost, uncomfortable, and completely out of place, standing on the sidewalk, his hands jammed in his pockets. Simone didn't say a word. She led him to the L train. The first sensory shock hit him immediately. The screech of metal on the rails, the crush of the morning crowd, the commingled smell of coffee exhaust, and too many people too close together. He visibly flinched, trying to maintain a personal bubble that didn't exist. They got off in Pilsen. Here the air was different. It was loud. Ranchera music blared from a bodega, kids screamed in a schoolyard, the smell of grilling meat wafted from a street taco cart. Simone led him on a 3-block walk. He was silent, his sharp eyes taking in everything: the vibrant murals, the boarded-up windows, the mothers pushing strollers. And then they were there. Mrs. Hernandez's building. It looked worse than the photos. The mortar was crumbling. A ground-floor window was broken and patched with cardboard. Simone didn't stop outside. She walked into the lobby where the smell hit Elias like a physical punch. It was the smell of neglect. Mildew, sickly sweet, and backed by the odor of backed-up garbage. It coated the back of his throat. "After you," Simone said. They climbed to the 3rd floor. The hallway was dark, the single bulb flickering desperately. She stopped at 3B, Mrs. Hernandez's old unit. It was sealed, but Simone had arranged with another tenant, Mrs. Rodriguez, in 3D. Mrs. Rodriguez, a woman with tired eyes and calloused hands, opened the door. "Miss Davis?" She nodded, then eyed Elias with open suspicion. "Thank you for seeing us, Elena," Simone said. "This is an associate." Mrs. Rodriguez led them into her cramped apartment. It was identical to Mrs. Hernandez's, and the smell of mold was even stronger here. Elias was trying not to breathe through his nose. "My son Javi," Mrs. Rodriguez said, pointing to a small boy on the sofa watching cartoons, with a small nebulizer machine running beside him. "The doctor says we have to move, but move where everywhere is too much." Elias stared at the machine. It was identical to the one in Miguel's photo. "Can you show us the shared wall?" Simone asked gently. Mrs. Rodriguez nodded, leading them to the bedroom. She pointed to the corner where the wallpaper was peeling. "It started here." Elias stepped forward. Behind the peeling paper was a sheet of black mold, spreading like a living cancer. It was damp to the touch. "This building," Simone said, her voice flat, devoid of emotion, "was acquired 7 years ago by Pinnacle Holdings Apex's parent company." Elias wasn't listening. He was staring at the wall. "They never replaced the 1970s-era ventilation," Simone continued. "They knew about the leaking pipes. Fixing it would have cost about $100,000. An expense that cuts into profit. Their profit." Elias put a hand to his mouth, nausea rising in his throat. $5 million, Simone said softly. "That was your initial investment. Thorn Ventures. And this," she patted the damp wall, "is your dividend." It was a kill shot. Elias turned abruptly. He stumbled out of the apartment, pushing open the door and leaning against the hallway wall, gasping for air. The hall air was no better, but at least it wasn't that room. He was not an emotional man. He didn't understand sadness. But what he was feeling was something more: primal revulsion, a physical gut-deep disgust. And it was aimed at himself. All the invisible numbers on his spreadsheets, the assets and portfolios, suddenly had a smell, a texture, and they smelled like rot. Simone and Mrs. Rodriguez came out. Mrs. Rodriguez looked at him, and her suspicion turned into a flicker of pity. "You okay, mijo? You look pale." Elias couldn't answer. They walked back to the L train in silence. Simone didn't say, "I told you so." She didn't have to. The reality screamed it. When they returned to the opulent penthouse, the contrast was grotesque. The air here was clean filtered and so perfectly climate-controlled, it was almost inhuman. Simone walked straight to her room. "I hope you saw enough," she said, exhausted. Elias didn't answer. He went straight to his home office, the glass wall overlooking Lake Michigan. He stood there for a long time, staring at the skyline. He saw the wealth, he saw the power, and now he saw the mold. He pressed the button on his phone. "Jessica," he said, his voice unusually hoarse. "Sir, cancel my afternoon." He took a breath, steadying himself. "I want a full report, immediately. Every asset in the Thorn Ventures real estate portfolio. I want to know their ethical impact." There was a pause on the other end. "Ethical impact, sir?" "You heard me," Elias snapped. "Find me every code violation, every tenant complaint, every lawsuit. I want to know exactly what we own. I want to know how many other Pilsen buildings are out there." He hung up. Elias looked at his reflection in the dark glass. For the first time in his life, he didn't see a winner. He saw a man in an expensive sweater, and he could smell the mold on himself. The visit to Pilsen had changed something in Elias. He became quieter, more focused, and for the first time seemed haunted. But it hadn't changed the facts on the ground in court. Simone had the morals. She had the truth. She had Elias's money, and she was still losing. 2 weeks after that fateful trip, Simone was in the war room at her new office, staring at a whiteboard covered in Post-it notes. Her team, 2 junior lawyers, a paralegal, and Sal had gone home hours ago exhausted. The problem wasn't the mold or the asthma anymore. The problem was Kirkland and Ellis. Or rather, a fictional firm of equal power the $500 an hour legal army Apex had hired. They were killing her case with 1,000 paper cuts. They demanded every email she'd ever sent, every memo, every invoice. They filed a motion to dismiss her toxicologist's testimony based on a minor technicality. They objected to every single request for documents, claiming they were overly broad and harassing. They were burying her in paper. They were stretching the case into a multi-year war of attrition. They knew that even with Elias's funding, the court's patience and her own was finite. Her passion was no match for an administrative army. She sank into her chair, rubbing her eyes. She was back where she started, helpless. Only this time her helplessness was better furnished. She didn't get back to the penthouse until after midnight. She hoped Elias was asleep. But he was there in the vast living room, standing before the glass wall, looking not out, but at a tablet. His office was filled with the ethical impact reports he'd demanded. He heard her enter her steps, heavy with fatigue. "You look how I feel when a hostile takeover fails," he observed, not looking up. "Close enough, Asa," Simone muttered, dropping her bag to the floor. "We're getting slaughtered. They're too big. They're dragging us into a legal swamp." "Explain," he said. Simone, too tired to argue, explained. She told him about the motions, the endless requests, the delay tactics. They're not fighting the facts, they're fighting the clock. And they have more of it than I do. They're making the case too expensive and too exhausting to win, even when we're right. Elias finally looked up, and this time there was no curiosity in his eyes. Just cold analysis. He set the tablet down. "Of course, he said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. Because you're playing their game. What do you mean I'm in court? That's where justice is. Elias almost laughed. No. That's where rules are debated. You're trying to win a legal fight. They're waging a financial war, and you're losing. He walked to the bar, not for a drink, but for his laptop, his weapon of choice. He flipped it open on the counter. You're attacking them with a shield, he said. It's time to use a sword. He sat down and waved her over. Reluctantly, she took the stool next to him. You're trying to win in the courtroom. Wrong, he said, his fingers flying. This game is won in the boardroom. You're trying to prove they're bad men. Wrong. You have to prove they're a bad investment. He pulled up a complex organizational chart of Apex and its parent Pinnacle Holdings. Here, he pointed to a series of other investment funds. Apex is private, but Pinnacle isn't. It has other investors. These people, he tapped the screen, they don't care about mold. They care about their ROI. So what? Simone asked, not following. So we make them care. Elias opened a new tab. What happens if a major financial journalist, not a local investigative reporter, but Forbes or the Wall Street Journal, runs a story not about sick kids, but about corporate fraud and hidden shareholder risk at Pinnacle Holdings? Simone's eyes widened. You have the financial fraud proof, I pointed out. Elias continued, his pace quickening. This was his territory. You leak it. Not to the court, but to the press. Pinnacle's stock value will tank. The other investors will panic. They'll start asking the board questions. They'll do your dirty work for you. It was ruthless. It was calculating. And it was brilliant. But that's not all, Elias said. You've forgotten your greatest asset. What? Me? He pointed to Thorn Ventures on the org chart. My fund is still a minority shareholder. That gives us standing. Standing you as their lawyer don't have. He turned to look at her, and his gaze was surgical. Tomorrow you are going to draft something. Not a legal motion, a shareholder resolution. You are going to demand a vote of no confidence in the entire Pinnacle Board of Directors, citing gross mismanagement and concealment of material liability. They'll ignore it, Simone said. We're one small shareholder. They won't be able to, Elias replied, a thin, cold smile playing on his lips. Because when you announce that resolution, you're going to do it at the same time the Wall Street Journal story drops. It's called leverage, Simone. You create a media crisis and a shareholder revolt in the same 24 hours. You turn your mold problem into a full-blown financial scandal. Simone sat stunned. She had spent her career learning the law. He had spent his learning how to break it. This, she whispered, this isn't justice. This is corporate warfare. Welcome to the real world, Simone, Elias said, his voice holding no triumph, just facts. Justice isn't given to people like Mrs. Hernandez. It is taken from people like Apex. You tried playing by your rules. Now let's play by theirs. She looked at him, the man she had loathed. He wasn't just giving her money. He was arming her. He was teaching her the enemy's language. Simone took a deep breath, feeling a new hardness settle in her chest. Passion was the fuel, but it needed a ruthless war machine to win. All right, she said, pulling out her own laptop. Show me how to draft this goddamn resolution. The penthouse was no longer a cold, sterile space. It had transformed into a war room. Whiteboards borrowed from Simone's office were now propped up in Elias's living room, covered in flow charts and legal timelines. The mahogany dining table had disappeared completely under stacks of documents, laptops, and endless empty coffee cups next to drained espresso glasses. The air was thick with energy, a strange mix of Simone's righteous fury and Elias's ruthless focus. They had been working non-stop for 72 hours planning their synchronized attack. And a strange thing had happened. The animosity between them had evaporated, replaced by an efficient, grudging respect. They were two sides of the same coin. Sal just confirmed, Simone said, hanging up her phone. She rubbed her eyes, tired. They have an internal memo from 2019. Warns the chief engineer of imminent catastrophic ventilation failure. They knew. They've known for 5 years. Elias, who had been pacing, stopped. He didn't react to the immorality. He reacted to the opening. Good, he said, his voice sharp. That's not just negligence. That's material concealment. Use that exact phrase in the resolution. It's a legal term that triggers their fiduciary liability. Simone nodded, her fingers flying across the keyboard. She was drafting the shareholder resolution. But under Elias's guidance, it wasn't a plea for justice. It was a financial indictment. She provided the heart, the human facts, the stories of Javi and Miguel, skillfully woven into the dry legal language. She wrote of undisclosed legal risks and asset value erosion. Elias stood behind her, reading over her shoulder. He admired the way she turned pain into a weapon. The passion he once dismissed was now the tip of the spear, and he was showing her where to aim. Add this, he said, pointing at the screen. State that the board breached its duty of good faith by prioritizing short-term profits over long-term asset stability. That will terrify the pension funds, the big investors. They were so arrogant, Simone muttered as she typed. They thought no one could touch them. They were used to the old you, Elias said. Well-meaning but unarmed. Now they're facing us. Us. The word hung in the air. It was almost 3 a.m. They were reviewing the original Thorn Ventures investment terms, looking for any final loophole. Wait, Simone said, suddenly squinting at the fine print. This can't be right. Section 4B, the Director Indemnification Clause. What does it say? Elias leaned in closer. It says the board is shielded from liability for ordinary business decisions, unless those decisions are in direct contravention of audited annual reports. They looked at each other. Their 2020 annual report, Elias said, a spark of excitement in his eyes, claimed they were in full compliance with all housing safety codes. The silence stretched, and then Simone laughed. It wasn't a happy sound. It was the exhausted, giddy laugh of someone who just found the key. Oh my God, she gasped. They trapped themselves. They lied in the annual report, which voids the clause protecting them from being sued for lying. And then the impossible happened. Elias smiled. It wasn't his cold, self-satisfied smirk. It was a real short, dry laugh. "They were arrogant," he repeated, but this time not as an accusation, as a statement of victory. Their laughter died down, leaving a silence that was completely different from the hostile quiet of before. It was charged. It was full of mutual respect. Simone looked at him. The selfish millionaire shell had cracked, revealing a brilliant strategist underneath. And she reluctantly admitted a man who had cared. He had gone to Pilsen. He had been affected. He just didn't show it with compassion. He showed it with strategic action. He wasn't trying to save his soul. He was trying to help her win. The fake contract hanging on the wall as a reminder of their deal suddenly felt ridiculous. What was between them now? This intense focus, this unexpected synchronicity, felt more real than any marriage she'd ever witnessed. "It's ready," Elias said, his voice low. He sent the final email leaking the documents to a journalist he trusted at the Journal. "Tomorrow morning when the market opens, we pull the trigger." "Done?" Simone whispered. All the adrenaline suddenly drained from her body, leaving her boneless. She couldn't even make it to her room. She sagged onto the sofa. "Just for a minute," she murmured, closing her eyes. Within seconds, she was fast asleep. Elias stood there for a moment watching her. The room was quiet. Their war room was silent. He looked at the woman who had stormed into his orderly, emotionless world and set it on fire. She was exhausted and stubborn and the smartest person he had ever met. She had shown him the mold. He had shown her the sword, and together they had made a storm. He felt a strange, protective urge. He went to his bedroom where he kept a thick, charcoal gray cashmere blanket he never used. He came back and gently draped it over her. He stood there for a long time in the dim light of the approaching dawn, watching her sleep under his blanket in his living room amidst the wreckage of their shared battle. His business contract had become dangerously complicated, and he realized he didn't mind at all. The ballroom of the Conrad Hotel was not a courtroom. It was worse. It was colder, wealthier, and armed with the polite indifference of the elite. This was the Pinnacle Holdings annual shareholders meeting. The room was packed with charcoal gray and navy blue suits. They were pension fund managers, bank representatives, and wealthy private investors. On stage, Pinnacle's CEO, a tanned, self-satisfied man named Robert Henderson, was trying to breeze through his PowerPoint. Pinnacle's stock had taken a severe hit since the Wall Street Journal article dropped 48 hours ago. Henderson was in damage control mode. A minor oversight vastly exaggerated by a sensationalist media. He said, his voice dripping with false assurance. "I assure you management has the situation completely under control. This Pilsen lawsuit is a minor nuisance." "I disagree," a clear, strong voice called out from the middle of the room. All sound stopped. Simone Davis stood up. All eyes turned to her. She wasn't wearing the fragile silk Elias had bought for her. She was wearing her sharpest lawyer's suit, a black power suit. Her hair was pulled back in a tight bun. She was a warrior in her armor. "Excuse me, miss." Henderson squinted, annoyed by the interruption. "I am Simone Davis," she said, walking decisively to the shareholder microphone. "I am here representing the proxy vote of Thorn Ventures, a significant shareholder." The Thorn name sent a ripple of murmurs. Henderson stiffened. "Ms. Davis," he said, trying to remain polite, "this is not the forum to debate an ongoing lawsuit." "No," Simone agreed, her voice echoing through the room. "This is the forum to discuss the gross mismanagement and fraudulent behavior that caused that lawsuit." She nodded to the technician. An image flashed onto the massive screen behind Henderson, replacing his fake growth chart. It was the photo of Miguel Hernandez breathing on his nebulizer. A collective gasp went up. It was too real. It was too human for this sterile room. "The board," Simone began, her voice ice cold, "would have you believe this was a minor oversight. This," she pointed to Miguel, "is Miguel Hernandez. He is 8 years old, and he cannot breathe because of your oversight." Henderson roared, "Turn that off." But it was too late. Simone wasn't just talking law. She was telling the story. She told them about Mrs. Hernandez. She told them about Javi. She spoke of the smell of mildew, of the scarred lungs. "You call this a nuisance?" she said, her eyes sweeping the front row. "I call this torture by negligence." "This is an outrage," another board member shouted. "We didn't know." "You did know," Simone countered, and now her voice was a prosecutor's roar. "We have the internal memo dated May 12, 2019, warning the board of imminent catastrophic ventilation failure. But you did nothing. Why? Because fixing it would have cost $100,000. She paused, letting the silence land. And then, she continued softly, "You did worse than nothing. You lied. In your own 2020 annual report, you claimed full compliance with all housing safety codes. That is securities fraud, ladies and gentlemen. And per Section 4B of your own bylaws, that lie just voided all your liability shields." The silence now was absolute. She had them. Henderson, his face red, stepped to his mic. "Are you quite finished, Ms. Davis? These baseless accusations are ridiculous. The board is in full. They aren't baseless." A second voice cut through, cold, powerful. Elias Thorne rose from the back row. If the name Thorne had caused a murmur, the presence of Elias himself was a bomb. He was a great white shark that had just swum into a fish tank. He wasn't dressed for a proxy vote. He was himself. He walked calmly to the second microphone, the silence following his every expensive step. He didn't look at Simone. He looked straight at Henderson. "Mr. Henderson," Elias began, his voice low and even, "Ms. Davis has eloquently presented the human cost. I am here to discuss the financial cost." He glanced at the screen where Miguel's photo remained. "She's right," Elias said. "We have the memo. We have the annual report. As an investor, I don't just find this immoral. I find it incompetent." The word incompetent cracked like a gunshot in the room. "You concealed a multi-million-dollar liability from your shareholders." Elias continued his pacing, ruthless and precise. "You gambled the health of children to save a minor maintenance fee. And you lost." He paused, looking Henderson dead in the eye. "Therefore, as the founder and CEO of Thorne Ventures, I am informing this board and my fellow shareholders that as of 9 a.m. this morning, Thorne Ventures began liquidating its entire position in Pinnacle Holdings. We are selling all of it." The room exploded. It was a stampede. Shouting, chairs scraping, everyone pulling out phones. On the large screen in the corner, Pinnacle's stock ticker, updated in real time, just became a red cliff. It was plummeting. "You can't," Henderson yelled, panic breaking through. "I just did," Elias said coldly, "and I am not finished." He turned to the chaotic room. "I am formally calling for an immediate vote of no confidence in Mr. Robert Henderson and this entire board on the grounds of gross financial mismanagement and a catastrophic failure of fiduciary duty." "I second it," shouted a major pension fund manager. "So do I," cried another. It was a coup, right on the floor. Chaos swarmed them. Henderson was surrounded by angry shareholders. Corporate lawyers were screaming into phones. Security was trying to restore order. In the eye of that storm, Simone remained at her microphone, her hands, she only just realized, shaking with adrenaline. She had done it. Elias cut through the crowd that was trying to get his attention. He walked straight to her, ignoring everyone else. They stood a few feet apart in their own bubble of silence amidst the chaos they had created. He didn't smile. He didn't touch her. He just looked at her, and in his eyes there was something she had never seen before, absolute unmixed respect. "That," he said, his voice just low enough for her to hear over the din, "is how you play the game." Simone took a breath, feeling the weight of the victory. She looked into his eyes, the man who had shown her how to use her weapons. "No, Elias," she said, a tired but triumphant smile on her lips. "That is how we play the game." A month after the boardroom coup, the Davis Justice Initiative was a different place. The office was buzzing. Phones rang. Keyboards clattered, people laughed. After Pinnacle's public collapse, the Apex lawsuit had settled in days. The new panicked leadership agreed to every single one of Simone's demands. The result was a total victory, a multi-million-dollar compensation fund for the Pilsen families, the immediate relocation of all families to safe housing, and a legally binding commitment to strip the building to its studs and rebuild it to code. Henderson and the entire board were fired. Simone stood in the middle of her office, coffee mug in hand, watching her new team, now 4 lawyers and 2 paralegals, celebrate. They had just won another smaller case, a wrongful eviction. It was an easy win. Everyone wanted to settle when they heard her name. "A toast?" the youngest lawyer, Sarah, said, raising her paper coffee cup. "To Simone, the queen of the checkmate." Simone smiled a real, genuine smile, but it was tired at the edges. She was proud of what she had built. This was all she had ever wanted: justice with not just passion, but power. But in the midst of the laughter and hopeful chaos, there was a strange, empty feeling. Today was October 18th. It was 365 days since she had signed her name to that fated contract. As per the terms, their agreement was officially complete. Elias had his inheritance. She had her fund. The transaction was over. That evening, she took a cab back to the penthouse one last time. The contrast was harsh. She had just left a place brimming with life, noise, and purpose. Now she walked into a cold, perfect silence. The penthouse had been restored to its original sterile state. The war room whiteboards were gone. The stacks of files, the empty cups, every trace of their unlikely alliance had been scrubbed clean. It was a museum again, not a home. She went to the West Wing. Her bedroom, which had been her prison and her sanctuary, was almost empty. Only her last overnight bag sat on the bed. She opened the closet. Empty. Except for one thing. Hanging alone on the rack was the navy silk dress Elias had made her wear to the engagement party. Her costume. The first armor he had given her. She reached out, touching the cool, expensive fabric. It was a symbol of everything she hated, the superficiality, the fake world. But it was also a symbol of the beginning of her change. She had learned to fight in it. She closed the closet door, leaving the dress. It belonged to this world, not to hers. She had her own armor now. She zipped her bag, took a steadying breath, and walked out to the living room. He was there, standing by the glass wall, as always, looking down at his city. He wasn't in a suit, just a thin sweater and slacks. The silence was suffocating, heavy with unspoken things. They weren't allies anymore. They weren't partners. They were just two people who had completed a business transaction. "So," Simone said, her voice sounding too loud in the stillness. "It's done." Elias turned. His face was, as always, unreadable. But his eyes, they were intensely focused on her. "Your office," he began. "It's thriving," she said, trying to keep her tone light, professional. "I thank you for saving it. You kept your promise." "And you," he replied, "kept yours. My inheritance issue is resolved." They were talking around it, using the contract terms as a shield to hide what had really happened. He had taught her power. She had shown him the mold. He had saved her office. She had saved his soul. But the contract had no clause for that. "Well," Simone said, picking up her bag. Her hand didn't feel steady. "I'll be going." "Your new apartment," he said, not a question, a statement. "In the South Loop, near your office." His team had checked on it. "Yes," she nodded. "I'll have my car take you," he offered, an automatic reflex of control. "No need," she said, perhaps a little too quickly. "I called one. It's waiting downstairs." She needed a clean break. She needed to leave on her own terms. She walked to the private elevator, each step echoing on the marble floor. She couldn't look back at him. "Simone," he called. She stopped, her hand hovering over the call button, but didn't turn. "You forgot something," he said. She frowned. "I don't think so. I double-checked." "The dress." Simone tightened her grip on her bag. "I didn't forget. I left it. It was never mine." The silence stretched. "Goodbye, Elias." She pressed the button. The elevator doors slid open. She stepped inside, and as the doors began to close, she took one last look at him. He was just standing there, a lonely silhouette in his kingdom of glass and steel. The doors chimed shut, cutting him off. Elias stood alone in the vast penthouse. He had gotten everything he wanted. The inheritance, full control of the empire. No more complications. He walked to the West Wing, into her empty bedroom. He opened the closet and stared at the navy dress. He reached out his fingers, brushing the cool silk. For the first time in his life, Elias Thorne didn't feel his apartment was empty. He felt it was lonely. And he realized that while he had been busy securing his inheritance, she had become something he had never planned for in any contract. The Davis Justice Initiative was filled with the smell of melted cheese and cardboard. It was Friday night, 3 weeks after the Apex settlement, and Simone was throwing a pizza party for her team and a few client families, including the Hernandezes. The office, once a far-fetched dream, was now lived in. It was lovably messy with case files, kids' drawings taped to the walls, and loud laughter. Miguel Hernandez, now living in a clean apartment in a different neighborhood, was chasing another lawyer's daughter, his happy squeal echoing down the hall. He wasn't wheezing anymore. Simone leaned against her office doorway, holding a cold slice of pizza, and smiled. A real, unfiltered smile, but with a trace of exhaustion at the corners of her eyes. This was why she did it. This was victory. "You look like a general who just won the war." Sal, her investigator, grumbled beside her, holding a beer. "I feel more like a tired party host," she laughed. But she knew he was right. She had won. She had made a terrible sacrifice, and it had paid off. "Hey, boss," Sarah, the youngest lawyer, called from the reception desk. "There's someone here to see you. He looks lost." Simone frowned and looked toward the entrance, and her breath caught in her throat. Elias Thorne was standing on the threshold of her loud, messy office. He wasn't wearing a Tom Ford suit. He wasn't wearing an expensive overcoat. He was in dark jeans and a simple gray turtleneck. His perfect hair was slightly messy, as if he'd run his hands through it. He looked completely out of place, like a black panther that had accidentally wandered into a kid's birthday party. The laughter and chatter in the room slowly died as people registered his presence. They didn't know who he was, but they sensed his weight. He only looked at her. His eyes swept the scene, the pizza boxes, the balloons, the running children, and finally landed on her. Simone felt her heart give one hard thud, then another. The contract was over. He had no reason to be here. She handed her pizza slice to Sal. "Hold this," she said quietly. She walked across the silenced room, each step feeling heavy. "Elias," she said, "what's wrong?" He didn't answer right away. He just looked at her as if trying to memorize her face in this new context. "Can we use your office?" she said, gesturing behind her. She led him into her private office, her sanctuary, and shut the door, cutting off the party noise. There was only the hum of her computer and their own breathing. "What are you doing here?" she asked, trying to keep her voice calm. "It's all settled. You have your inheritance." "Yes," he said. His voice sounded different, less sharp. Then he took a step toward her, and he was holding something. A folder, bound in dark blue leather. It looked terrifyingly familiar. Her heart sank. "Another contract," she said, weariness mixing with wariness. "Some loose end I missed, a bonus for a job well done." "No," he said. "It's a new one." He placed it on her desk. Simone looked at it, then at him. "I don't understand. Our deal is done." "That deal is," Elias said. He took a breath, and for the first time Simone saw him look hesitant. "I've done a few things since you left. I liquidated Thorn Ventures. Simone blinked. You? What? The whole fund? All of it, he confirmed. The entire portfolio. I sold everything. Apex, Pinnacle, all of it. Why? She whispered. That was your empire. Because, he said, and he looked her straight in the eye, the intensity of his gaze holding her captive. Because I couldn't get rid of the smell of mold. I tried. I went back to the spreadsheets and the numbers, but I could still smell it. I could still see that wall. He tapped his head. You showed me, Simone. Money is just numbers on a screen, until it's not, until it smells like sickness. He paused, gathering his thoughts. So I dissolved it. I'm starting something new, something different. He pushed the folder toward her. She looked at the cover. It didn't say marriage contract or NDA. It said the Chicago Impact Fund, Founding Partnership Agreement. She looked up at him confused. It's going to be the largest investment fund in the city. Elias explained, the old cold passion returning to his voice, but aimed differently now. But it won't invest in shell companies. It will invest in sustainable, affordable housing. Clean energy for low-income neighborhoods. Job training programs. Things like your office. He gestured out the door where the party's laughter filtered in. It needs to be led, he continued. And it needs a moral compass. It needs someone who will read every line of the fine print. Someone who will walk through the buildings. Someone who isn't afraid to tell me I'm a moral idiot. He held her gaze. It needs a chief legal counsel, a founding partner. Someone whose moral compass can't be bought. He was using the exact words he had mocked her with a year ago. Elias, she whispered, not knowing what to say. This contract, he said, placing his hand on the folder, is permanent, Simone. Not 1 year. And this time, he looked deep into her eyes. It's completely real. The air in the room stood still. This wasn't a millionaire trying to escape an inheritance clause. This was a man who had been broken down and rebuilt. Just like her. Simone looked into his eyes. She saw his ruthlessness, his intelligence. But now, she also saw the shame he had felt, the respect he had earned, and this terrifying, genuine offer. She realized that the first contract, the one she had cursed, wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a sacrifice. It was destiny. It was the hard, painful, necessary path to get them both to this exact moment. He had saved her office. She had saved his soul. And now, together, they could save the city. Simone smiled. A real slow smile that spread across her face. Her eyes welled with tears, but they were of relief, not sorrow. She didn't say anything. She simply placed her hand on top of his, right on the dark blue folder. The real destiny contract was only just beginning. Power built the fortress, conscience opened the door. If Simone and Elias taught us anything tonight, it's this: justice isn't found. It's engineered case by case, ledger by ledger, choice by choice. From a torn marriage contract to a shareholder revolt, they turned numbers into oxygen for families who couldn't breathe. And when the smoke cleared, a new pact emerged not for inheritance, but for impact. If this story moved you like the video to boost it, comment your favorite moment, the boardroom coup, the mold wall reveal, and subscribe for more narrative deep dives. Share this with someone who still thinks empathy can't change markets. Next episode will follow the first project of the Chicago Impact Fund and the cost of staying clean in a dirty game. Until then, take care and keep rewriting the terms.